Check 1 2 1 2. Check check check. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Commission on Connecticut's Development and Future regular commission meeting, Monday, July 10th. Call the meeting to order at 3:07 p.m. We are still awaiting a couple of more members in order to have a quorum in order to conduct any votes today. So we're still need two more people to meet our at least a quorum of our membership here. So we'll need to hold off on the approval of the June 12th meeting minutes and move into business reviewing of the work group recommendations. At our last meeting, we did go through the spreadsheet of all the various work groups with the recommendations, looking at whether there was a financial impact, administrative or legislative action required, priority level, immediate or the future, and potential next steps. And all of these will be for recommendations for inclusion into our final report, which is due January 1st, 24, back to the legislature. One of the items is just as a reminder that all of these are, strictly recommendations back to legislature, in a report on the various topics as what was asked for. And then depending upon what legislative action there may be required on that assignment, potentially to other legislative committees that would take on further action from those recommendations. But want to see if my co-chair, Representative Rojas, has anything he'd like to add as we start the meeting.
No, thank you, Martin, and I'm sorry I can't be there. I left you all by your lonesome there in the room, but I got stuck at work. But glad to see everybody, and I'm happy to meet. We can continue with the meeting.
Great, thank you, Representative. So we're still waiting on a quorum. So I'm going to just do a quick. I'm going to do a screen share of our spreadsheet just so people can, so we can just kind of do a quick review of that as soon as I find it. There we go. Okay. So this was just an update review from what we had done at the last couple of meetings, going through looking at each of the work group recommendations. For that, we also sent this out to all the co-chairs of the work group just to make sure that everything was captured correctly on here. So we did review all of that. The only one that we had kind of left was on sewage, which I did go through, and let me just get to that one. Excuse me. There we go. To look through on this was our only one we didn't complete at the last meeting. In going through their recommendations, I tried to just go through this and note it. So, but want to, obviously, if there's any changes or corrections anyone sees here, can definitely, make those. First one was conduct a data-driven study. Yes, any study would have a financial impact, but that could be an administrative, type of item. Wouldn't necessarily have to be a legislative. Development of municipal plans for infrastructure. Be more staff time for DPH and our COGS for doing that on an administrative side. The next three were all about better communication or coordination between DEEP and DPH. State agency actions must be considered consistent with the state plan of conservation development, including sewer extensions under the purview of DEEP and water extensions under DPH, which would be more staff time administrative. Rationale and clarify jurisdiction enforcement authority of common ownership systems. That was done under Public Act 23-207, Section 27. With regulations that are due July 1st of 2025, changing the 7,500 to 10,000 gallons for those community systems. Evaluation of the adequacy of resources for oversight and enforcement of failed systems. Review of water pollution control plans and new permits, develop a statewide database system. So that could be, you know, administrative as well, looking at that, but definitely a financial cost for developing a database system. Then we had better coordination between municipal, state governments and the COGS, requiring water pollution control authorities to prepare and regularly update water pollution control plans at intervals to be determined. Would be more of a local cost. But if there's going to be a requirement on those plans, I would assume that would be a legislative action, potentially under Public Health Committee. Whoops. Then we had adding wastewater systems to required infrastructure identified in municipal plans of conservation development. I said if we're going to, you know, certain requirements that we want municipalities to include in those plans, that would be a legislative action. And then addition to that, requiring municipal plans of conservation and development, water pollution control plans to be consistent with the state POCD. These would be legislative, you know, items there. And then the last one was about an education program, which, you know, could be done on an administrative side, but there could be consultant experts needed, you know, as a financial impact there. So I kind of just reviewed those earlier today to just kind of complete our chart with the sewage, but I do want to ask if anyone has anything that I've caught incorrectly or wants to add to that. And I'm not seeing anyone that I can see. Are there any other hands raised? Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm doing small screen here and I can't see everybody, so wanted to just double check. Okay, and we do not have a quorum yet either. Okay. So as we're kind of just reviewing here, because one of the next steps is obviously, unless there's questions on any of the items, you know, on the spreadsheet or recommendations, one of the next processes for us is, before we can do a draft report, is for us to vote on these recommendations. You know, do we include those in our final recommendations or not? Obviously, those that may have been adopted of, you know, legislative already, such as the sewage we just, you know, spoke about, we can make note of it that that's already been adopted, you know, in the report. So it wouldn't necessarily be a recommendation, but we can say these were things that came up in kind of a subcategory of that process. So, but lacking, you know, a quorum, obviously we, you know, cannot vote on all of this to be able to move forward and start doing a draft report on that. But is there any particular recommendation that stands out that anyone has major concerns over that we need to readdress? That would kind of be our next step, looking through any of the work group recommendations. If there's any concerns, I didn't note any major concerns as we went through them. We do know that, you know, some may have some financial impact, others, those are obviously pieces that need further, you know, review as it goes through the next steps for that, but do want to open it to see if anyone has any further notes or comments on any of the recommendations that we have. Okay, and I'm not seeing any. Oh. From Anika? Oh, Anika, please. Thank you.
Thanks. I think I raised this when the model codes group presented, but I do have a concern about recommending expenditures on sort of voluntary codes. I don't know if there's a way in the report to prioritize expenditures to the extent that things have a fiscal or would have a fiscal impact, that we say that some are more important than others. You know, I've been around long enough to know that when you hire a consultant to do something like this, it takes years and then they just sit on a shelf. So I just think, given the significant need that we've got, that the recommendation for hiring a consultant to draft these model codes is basically money down the toilet. I don't think those things would ever get adopted or used. So I just have a tough time with that. Like, I guess it's the first model code recommendation. Provide funding to engage a consultant or multiple consultants to develop voluntary model code guidelines for municipalities. You know, if we had some mandates in state law, and then we hired consultants to help localities understand how those look on the ground, that'd be one thing. But so long as they're purely voluntary, I don't think I can get behind that particular recommendation. I don't know if we intend to vote on these as a package or one by one. But that's the one thing that jumps out at me for now.
Thank you, Anika. And I did have that noted in my notes. It's not on the spreadsheet here, but I did have that note as, you know, a concern I know you had with that. I'm just going over if I did put a note there. Nope. But thank you for that. And that is definitely something that we can look at as we're, you know, going through this and kind of pulling out all those that may have a financial impact and kind of doing a priority chart of those, just as you had suggested there. You know, there's no, you know, issue with that. Also, some of these, you know, obviously these are recommendations back, you know, to be like, okay, which are we going to do, you know, and some of those, you know, being administrative versus legislative, you know, obviously differences there as well. So, you know, comments are, you know, duly noted, and we can definitely, you know, look into that. In regards to how we want to vote on this, that's up to the full commission as a whole. You know, we can do each work group separate. We can do each individual line separate. We can do an entire package. I mean, there's numerous ways, you know, we can do that, and open to, you know, obviously when we, whether or not if we get a quorum today or we have to do it at the next meeting, obviously that'll be from however the motion is made for that. And we can obviously discuss that as well.
Excuse me, but we now have a quorum.
Oh, we do. Thank you. I guess we do have a quorum now, so that's good. So hopefully that answers your questions, Anika, and I appreciate that on the, you know, the financial impact with the model codes. And I do know there are, you know, municipalities that have adopted model codes already. So there is some pieces out there already on that. But, you know, as we've, you know, noted, that consultant or expert needs of, you know, those costs on, you know, if it's a voluntary type thing, definitely, you know, worth consideration of how we prioritize anything with a financial impact.
Just a quick clarification. When you said there are municipalities that have adopted model codes already, you mean form-based codes? I don't know what it means to
Just
adopt a
repeat that
model
again.
code.
I'm sorry.
When you said there are municipalities that have adopted model codes already, did you mean form-based codes?
That may be, is it Canton and why did I want to say Hartford, but
And then I think, well, Hartford has a form-based code too, and there's part
is
of
it form-based? Okay.
Yeah, okay, got it. I mean, so that's another thing that's I guess it's implicit given the nature of the presentation from that working group, because the presentation centered form-based codes is my recollection, but it's not necessarily the case that a model code would be a form-based code.
Correct. Right. And thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, at this time, if we mind, what we're going to do is, because we do have a quorum now, is if we can go back to the approval of the June 12th, 2023 minutes and take a motion to accept those.
So move.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Representative. Is there any discussion, comments? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Is there any opposed? Is there any abstentions? And the minutes are passed. Thank you. So then moving on, is there any other discussion on any of, the recommendations? Want to make sure everyone has information they need before we'd either proceed to a vote on any of the recommendations for this. I want to make sure. And also, as Anika had mentioned, is there a format? People like to look at these as a work group and vote on them, or a package as a whole, or each individually. I leave that up to any suggestions or recommendations from the commission.
Hi, Martin, Jason here. I mean, in the interest of time, I don't know if we want to kind of take this on kind of the way we do consent calendars. Maybe you can go through each item and just ask if there's any opposition to including them in a package of recommendations that we would vote on, as opposed to taking a vote on every single one individual.
That makes sense. Thank you for that recommendation. And so let me go back to a shared screen here. Okay, so I'm going to start at the top here, just going right through the spreadsheet. So if you're not on screen or you're following on your hard copy or computer at home, you'll be able to follow along. So we'll start with the consolidated housing plan. And I'm just going to do the recommendation. I'm not going to read all the additional information there. Excuse me. So the first one is require regular state housing needs assessments every 5 years and incorporate findings. Does anyone have an issue with including that recommendation? And I'll ask staff to make sure that they see if there's any hands.
Martin, Representative Scott has his hand raised.
I'm sorry?
Representative Scott has his hand raised.
Oh, thank you. Representative Scott?
Yes, thank you. This is just for clarification, saying not an issue on the specific one. Is these are the motions going to be ultimately to put these into the report? I just want to make sure what we're truly voting on for them to happen after we walk out of voting on this today. So if we can just clarify that for me, I greatly appreciate it.
Sure, not a problem. And thanks for that. So yes, this is to include these into our final report. Obviously, we'll have a draft report first, which will be the next steps. These are the recommendations we want to include into the final report that will report back out of this commission. So is that set for you, Representative? Then
That works. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, terrific. Okay. So not seeing any issues with that one. We'll move on to the second one, tailor plan to communities. Does anyone have any concerns?
Martin, I just have a question. This is
Sure,
Betsy
Betsy.
Garrett from Cost. How does this coordinate with the fair housing assessments that are going to be conducted by, I think, 2025 by OPM? Is this something that's currently being done on the state level, or?
So I can't speak on the consolidated plan itself, but maybe the working group, if their members are here, can. But I could tell you that the fair share housing right now is the only thing passed in legislation was just to develop the methodology.
Right.
Only. So we don't know what's going to happen with that yet. That'll be next legislative session when that methodology is presented back to the legislature and then determine what's going to happen with the fair share methodology side.
All right, thank you. So this is
Kind of two
referring
separate
to
pieces.
state housing needs assessments conducted or developed by Department of Housing currently?
Correct. Yeah, that's consolidated housing plans under DOH.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. The next is identify opportunities, incentives for rehabilitation and preservation. Any concerns with that one?
What-
Fourth one, address housing quality in healthy homes. Any concerns? Next is expand evaluation of prior performance and align it with AAP and CAPER. If I pronounce the acronym right, I apologize if not. Okay. Not seeing any hands raised. Next is non-funding housing strategies in alignment with outside actors and plans. And the last one on the consolidated housing plan is incorporate input from people with lived expertise. Okay. So the next set will probably go a little bit quicker only because a lot of these were already, as we know, went through Planning and Development Committee. Unfortunately, did not get passed out of session. But obviously they were pertinent to being in this legislative session on it for ways to help improve the process for the state plan of conservation and development. So really, they would not get included per se in, future plan. It could be some things that we may want to consider to be looking at, because then it's going to be another 5 years after the next plan's adopted. So the next kind of series here, which already talked that we had a bill, but it didn't receive Senate action, go through the next, 10 or so pieces there on it, which then brings us to the last one under state municipal plans was, further changes may be warranted as a C&D plan gets developed, particularly to 16A-35C priority funding areas and locational guidance map. And looking at that piece there on that as they're going through that process. So does anyone have any concerns with that one? Senator Wong, afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Martin, for holding down the fort, and through you to the co-chair, Majority Leader, House Majority Leader Rojas. Through both of you, what we're going to vote on is the recommendation of this commission on the issues that you have raised. My concern is we are going to vote and give the weight of this very important commission and all the very hard work of the various working groups that put things together, but we're struggling to get a quorum. We have many members that are out and about on vacation or had prior commitments. I hesitate that I just wanted to put into the record that my concern is in this vote, and it's an appreciation of the work of the work group, but we're casting the weight of this commission with these recommendations to when we're barely at a quorum. And it's a challenge to put such a weight, unless I hear otherwise, unless this vote is not as weighty as I believe it to be, then through both of you as chairs, could you explain a little bit, as Representative Scott mentioned earlier, what are we voting on and what weight does that give it? Does that weight give this commission the recommendation to move forward in the next legislative session to say the whole body of this commission voted to approve these kind of languages? And as you articulated earlier, this earlier potential bill did not pass the legislative committee process, but we're going to give weight by this vote from this commission and move it forward in the next legislative session. So through both co-chairs, could you both give me a better explanation as to the weight of what we're voting on today and my concern with a barely quorum to make that decision today? So thank you both, if you could.
Sure. So I'll start and then Representative Rojas, I'll let you tie in. So I see the vote today as these are the items we're looking at to include in our draft recommendation, report. obviously, which we still are going to need to vote on a final, report coming out of this commission. So, but we're looking about what things are we including that, in that draft final report, which is our next step on here, and completely understand, the concerns about making sure we have a quorum here, everything else. In honesty, looking at August being our next meeting, I see that might even be harder to get more people in August than it is here in July, for that. And I do appreciate everyone taking the time out to come here and do this. But I see that this is a first step. We're voting do we include these into our final recommendation? But we're still going to need to vote, on that final report, once it's drafted, and looking at it and making sure the terminology is correct. And, if we're going to go into, financial with priority levels, everything else, there's some further items that we're going to need to review as well moving forward. But Representative, my co-chair.
No, thank you. Yeah, no, and thank you, Senator Wong. It's a fair question to ask. I mean, I don't know that we're operating any differently than any other body that's in the legislature. At some point we have a quorum that enables us to take action as an entity, as a commission or committee, recognizing, I think the total number of people on this commission were 36 or something like that. So I always knew that we wouldn't always have 100% participation or attendance, but your point about taking final votes, I think, is an important one. And obviously, we're looking, as Martin indicated, we're looking forward with taking a vote on making recommendations for the draft report. That doesn't necessarily preclude other members of the committee who aren't here today from perhaps registering a concern or opposition to a particular recommendation. We can certainly note that in the report. While they're not here to vote today, that doesn't preclude them from offering feedback on the recommendations that are put forward, so that we can at least have their viewpoint reflected in the report that we put forward. That might be an option that we want to take.
Thank you both for the explanation. I appreciate that. And let me also thank the members of the working group that worked very hard through this whole process. But nevertheless, and I'm going to support this moving forward because we do need to find solutions. But I did want to raise the concern for those that may not have been actively engaged and may have concerns about it. I want to reserve the opportunity to make sure that it's duly noted that they may have concerns. And as we get more engaged after the summer months, and as we get more deliberative into these kind of solutions, that we have a full breadth of different viewpoints. So I appreciate that. I'll be voting yes today in acknowledgement of the work of the co-chairs and also the various work groups, but it still continues to be a work in progress. Would that be a fair statement, both co-chairs?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, and I just want to note that the House did pass those provisions. It was that other chamber that didn't pass it. So,
thank you, Majority Leader, and maybe in the work in this, we can get to a collaboration and get some results so we can address the important issues raised by this working group. So, thank you very much. But thank you, everyone, and thank you to the co-chairs for your time and explanation.
No problem. Thank you, Senator. Representative Kavar-Dura.
Thank you so much, Mr. Co-Chair, and to the good senator and my good colleague from the Senate. I'm just so grateful that he raised that, because I think that in full transparency of what the process has been, I just want to commend the chairs, because we were able to look at all of these recommendations, I believe, for at least 2 weeks as the full committee. So we had a significant amount of time that if we knew that we weren't going to be able to participate either in person or by Zoom today, that we were able to, by email, share any concerns we might have on those recommendations. And I just want to further thank the extensive work of the working groups, because as they proceeded to present over the last few months all of their recommendations, I just got on the committee in January, but I have found that the presentations have been very useful, even if I wasn't able to be in the room or watch them live, to go back and to really understand the depth and the breadth of the work that they did. And I think that we had so much opportunity in those meetings as well to weigh in on and ask questions of some of their suggestions by working groups. So I really do appreciate that. And I'm just so glad that this process has and continues to be so transparent. And I know that we all are working towards the same good end of having great work done in the legislature. So I just wanted to commend everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Representative, for those comments. Okay, then we are going to move on to the next, which is the sewage, which I kind of went through just a little bit earlier in our meeting here, but we'll go through these to see if any concerns. Conduct a data-driven study of other state and county sewage programs with a focus on Q and ATS. Any concerns with that one? Then we have development and municipal plans with infrastructure intersections. And I'm just going to pause for a moment afterwards and just check to see if any hands are raised. So, okay. The next three, which I'll kind of, apologies here, because they're all kind of the same recommendation of better coordination between DEEP and DPH. So I'll kind of go to the additional piece there for state agency actions must be consistent with the state plan of conservation and development. Any concerns there? Okay. As we said, the next one has been addressed, but obviously we could include that in as well. The rationale and clarification for the 7,500 gallons per day division, which we know has been changed in the Public Act already. And the last one on the coordination was the evaluation of the adequacy of resources for oversight and enforcement of failed systems and review of water pollution control plans and new permits and developing a statewide database system for all agencies. Yeah, Francis, good afternoon.
Thank you, Martin. On the item that state agency plans must be consistent or actions with the state plan of conservation and development, in some cases, we may have federal law or requirements or court precedents that may conflict with the state plan of conservation and development, but that would supersede it. So I would like to make sure that we're not requiring state agencies to comply with a plan in the event that that plan itself is inconsistent with something that supersedes it.
Thank you. I'll make a note of that. So we can definitely include that in any of our, into the report as well. Anything else on that one? Okay. Then we have better coordination between municipal, state government, and the COGS, requiring water pollution control authorities to prepare and regularly update water plans as at intervals to be determined. And then we have, adding wastewater systems to be required infrastructure identified in municipal plans of conservation and development. Okay. And then, and then we have an education program to be explored under sewage. Okay. So no hands. We'll move on to the.
Can I ask a question about that last one?
Sure, Anika. Go ahead.
I don't, and maybe I should remember this from the presentation, but who's the education program is for? Who's the education program for, and why isn't it? Sorry, I'm just seeking clarification on that box because I'm not following it.
Sure. Do I have any members of the sewage committee work group here that could address that? or possibly, I don't know, don't want to put Jennifer Perry on the spot, maybe.
I
you.
was just going to raise my hand, Martin,
Thank you.
as soon as I could find it on my screen. So, so the intent here, the original discussion with the working group was to potentially recommend a testing facility be pursued, much like some of our neighboring states have, which focus on testing the efficacy of alternative wastewater treatment systems for household use, small commercial use. And basically the decision that we came to was that we don't really need a testing center in Connecticut that would look at how those systems function. What the recommendation is to look at education for municipal officials and the public on how those systems are operated, what's required to keep them working, things like that, really more so than about the way the systems would perform. So it's really intended to be education and outreach for homeowners and municipal officials that might be considering the use of these types of systems.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. And Anika, does that answer your questions? Well,
Yes, thank you.
okay, great. Thank you. Anything else on that? Okay, then we'll move down to, whoops. Model codes. And the first one on model code was provide funding to engage a consultant or multiple consultants to develop voluntary model code guidance for municipalities. I know Anika mentioned her comments prior to this as we were doing some preliminary discussion, but Anika, I don't know if you want to add anything else for those that may have joined later on that.
Yeah, we are, thanks to our, thanks to the extent of our local land use regulations, we have the most land use and zoning lawyers per capita than any other state in the country. And I suspect we're probably competing for most land use consultants per capita for any state in the country. So I'd be inclined to, if given the opportunity to vote on these one by one, I'd vote against this one. I don't see the need to put another study on the shelves, never to be consulted by any local land use official in the state because they're not required to. It wouldn't stop me voting for the package today, but I would certainly vote against this one. And, when the appropriate time came, write what I would, if it were a minority report on this question.
Okay, thank you. And I did also have a note for us because we had mentioned about looking at all of the, just to reiterate, of anything that was financial impact item is possibly having a section to prioritize those items as well, with funding as well as a extra potential thing, for all of these. This is a higher priority than this if there's funding, priority levels.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else on that one? Then the next one is enhanced land use planning capacity at the state level and provide sufficient resources to better integrate statewide objectives and local land use decisions. Any comments on that one? Okay. The next is to facilitate the incorporation of best practices into municipal regulation, standards and processes, adoption of best practices. Any concerns? Okay. And the last one on model codes is improve coordination to support effective and efficient plan implementation. Okay. Then the last bucket is the affordable housing plans. Direct towns in specific timetable to revise their 21-22 plans in light of guidance stated in the report, which those may remember there was a long list of recommended best practices. Betsy.
Thanks, Martin. I just wanted to point out that during the legislative session, there was language added to the affordable housing planning statute under 830J to also ensure that the plan improves the accessibility of affordable housing units for individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities. So I'm not sure if that should be reflected in this since, again, it was adopted this past session.
Thank you for that. I will add that into the notes there on that. Thanks for the reminder of that. I'll call it the public act number and everything and just add that into the comments that that piece was adopted. That's a good note. Thank you. Okay. The next is specify which board, agency, commission has the responsibility to improve and administer the plan. Okay. Consider adopting specific recommendations in the report as action steps and timetables. Require each updated report contain a checklist against the criteria stated in the report. Okay, and the last one was require Department of Housing prepare and publish a model affordability plan. Okay. Well, that runs through all of our all of the recommendations for that. We'll add the couple other comments that were mentioned into just our notes here, that which will be helpful in, drafting our final report. Heard the one concern regarding the model codes just because of financial, impact there. But I opened the floor for any further discussion or any motions.
I'll break the awkward silence.
Thanks, Representative.
No, I mean, it appears that there's a fair amount of consensus about, obviously, regarding most of the recommendations. And in terms of structuring a motion, I don't know if it makes sense to use the numbered rows on the Excel spreadsheet that you noted. So we could take a motion for, items 2 through whatever, minus the one that we have at least heard opposition to, and perhaps take action on that, and then we can take individual action on that last item.
That's fine.
Throw that out there as a proposal.
Do you want to make that a motion?
Sure. Let me just confirm the number that there was opposition to. So that would be item 28. So I would make a motion to approve recommendations 2 to 36 with the exception of number 28.
Did you say 2 or 1 to? Sorry.
Well, 1 is the top row.
Oh, the header. Okay, I see what you're saying. I don't have the numbers on my sheet, so I see what you're doing now. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm using the row numbers.
Okay, so we have a motion. What do we say? For all of the recommendations except for line 28. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll try this first. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Is there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Okay, then the ayes have it that those are all adopted for inclusion into the our final report. So then if we can go back to line 28 on the model codes to provide funding to engage a consultant or multiple consultants to develop voluntary model code guidelines for municipalities. Is there a motion to take action on that one line item, on that one line?
Like Ben is raising his hand.
Yep, I'll motion that be included as well.
Thank you, Ben. Is there a second?
Senator Moore will second.
Thank you, Senator. Is there any discussion? All
Hand
those,
raised again. Oh, Ben has his hand raised.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Thank you. Just to respond to Anika, I think the intent of this, and I'm trying to remember from the presentation, was really, again, the expense of coming up with particularly a form-based code. And the thought was that anything we can make it easier for particularly smaller municipalities to take advantage of this where there is interest would be helpful. I mean, certainly the cost of it are something that our legislators will have to consider. But I understand the point, and I get the cynicism of reports not being used, but anything we can do to help towns who want to do the right thing, I think we should at least be encouraging on this committee. Again, obviously, we're not putting a dollar number on it, so I don't think it is an issue of taking away from anybody at this point. So I would recommend keeping it on, and happy to have any other discussions about that if anybody wants. I don't think it does any harm.
Thank you, Ben. Is there any other discussion?
Yes, I'll respond briefly. So I don't think there's anything inherent to the notion of a form-based code that, how to put it. So I don't think there's anything necessarily inherently good about a form-based code, right? Everything's in the implementation, and we have form-based codes in the state that are fine, and we have form-based codes in the state that have been thoroughly kind of defanged and they've been NIMBY'd the same way that anything else might be, right? And watered down the way that anything else can be. And I'm not seeing, I don't think there's a case for the state spending money to encourage towns to do this. There might be other things where it makes more sense. So I think I'd probably vote in favor of a state study on appropriate inclusionary zoning ordinances, right? So, towns and cities that really care about affordable housing will commission an economist or a study to say, hey, what's the percentage we can impose on developers without killing development? And you'll see in New Haven, they'll do the math and they'll say, we think we can get away with 5% downtown. And then you'll see towns like Darien and they'll say, we don't care if we're killing development, we're going to do 20% all over the place, right? So, there are things where you can imagine the state, there'd be a legitimate state interest in spending money to ensure that towns do things in a particular way that's smarter. And I'd be for that. I'm not like moved or convinced that form-based codes are automatically or inherently good. So I'm not, there is the, yes, spending money on another study to put on the shelf, which is the current concern I voiced earlier. But then there's also this, why are we spending money on this? Like, why is this the thing and not TOD zoning or inclusionary zoning studies? Or like I could list 10 other things where we could hire expertise from economists and others that would be useful to towns before I get to this one. So, not to attempt to necessarily convince anybody else, but that just to explain why I'll be voting no on this. And thank you for piecing it out.
Thank you, Anika. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, we will have a vote. All those in favor of including line 28 on the model codes signify by saying, oh, excuse me, one moment. Francis?
Yeah, I sat on that subcommittee, and I have to agree with Anika on this, that there's nothing particularly, form-based codes are a tool, just as Euclidean zoning is a tool, performance zoning is a tool, conditional zoning is a tool. And I did, maybe I was an outlying voice on that subcommittee, but, you know, I do think that perhaps this is really about zoning reform and not so much about one type of zoning reform, just being form-based codes, and maybe generalizing it just to be zoning reform and provide state support for that and not restrict it only to form-based codes could ultimately be more powerful. I know the state has supported new POCDs in the past. The state has not, in my recollection, provided resources for zoning reform.
Thank you, Francis. Any other comments before we call the vote? Okay, all those in favor, sorry, Steve Kleppen?
Sorry, I was trying to get to my button quick enough.
Okay.
Before you called it. I sat on that subcommittee and I don't think I mean, the form-based code was a large part of the conversation, but I don't think it was the final recommendation that we had to adopt a municipal or a statewide form-based code. I think that was one of the tools discussed. And I think part of it was, as was previously stated, was to provide some guidance. And I think part of it also was visuals for some communities that were fearful of more dense developments and how that would impact, like, you know, if they had more of a charming downtown, how could they kind of integrate additional development without impacting what everybody likes about that area. So I don't know if it necessarily was tied to form-based code, and obviously that's one possible tool to achieve that, but I don't think there's anything, at least the language doesn't specifically state form-based code. I don't know if you could, you know, parse that out and, you know, clarify a little bit that it's not, you know, pointing in one specific direction, but maybe that helps soften some of the resistance a little bit.
Thank you, Steve, for that. Anybody else? Okay, now we'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor to include signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed,
Nay.
Anika, is there anyone else opposed? Okay, then it's voted to include. Thank you all. Our next steps will be, you know, I am happy to work with our co-chair and then our working group, you know, chairs in putting all of these recommendations into a draft report and work on that over the next month. We're on target with our draft, you know, report to be by September 1st. May be able to get a draft report by our August meeting. We'll see how well we can do that. Pulling all of this together into a draft report so everyone will have time in order to review it prior to the next meeting. And then obviously offer any comments, suggestions, everything else until we finalize it and have it done, hopefully, you know, obviously before the January 1st deadline. Any comments on or any thoughts anyone wants to add just upon any format of the report? Senator Moore.
Thank you. I don't have a question on the format, but I wanted to ask Representative Rojas how this will work with the Majority Leader's task force that we put together in the housing bill.
I think was that question directed at me?
Yes, it was.
Okay, I heard my title, but I thought I heard a different name, so I wasn't sure. Sorry, Senator Moore.
Did I call you Senator?
No, I just thought I heard a different last name.
No,
Yeah,
Rojas.
please.
Thank
I don't
you.
want you to demote me. Could you just repeat your question?
You're really digging in as senators. That's the second one. You don't get another one, bud.
Were you asking how these recommendations would interpret?
Together, because I hear Anika's concern about these reports that sit on the shelf and nobody does anything with it after. I mean, if all the people who worked on this, and I just came on board in February, if all the people have done this kind of work, how is it going to work with what's coming up next?
In terms of the Majority Leader Roundtable?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think these recommendations, given the breadth of individuals who participated in the process, kind of from all walks of life on this particular issue, I think this is this will be a document that should inform our thinking as we convene another group to continue the conversation around obviously this very important issue. So I think this is a lot of legwork that has been done by a lot of smart people that it should inform the process that we look to engage in with that group convening soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome, Senator. Any other comments? Okay, we'll move on. The next commission meeting is scheduled for August 7th. We will see how far along we can get with a draft report, because obviously that will be the next main topic of our next meeting. Is there other business to come before the commission before we go to public comment? Any other thing from commission members?
No, I would just, again, I mean, I know I've thanked profusely over the time that we've been doing this, but I want to thank everybody again. As we saw over the past legislative session, you know, there seems to be a lot of consensus on the issue, and then there's also a lot of disagreement on the issue, which means that we still have opportunities ahead of us to actually make some really good movement on this.
Thank you, Representative. Appreciate the comments and echo those as well. Is there any public comment? I don't believe we had anyone sign up for public comment, but do offer anyone that's joined us or any commission members any public comment. And not seeing any hands raised. With that, at 4:04 p.m., I would take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Representative. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.